herd immunity, if you can just define, like you said, most of us in the swine industry are familiar with that, but it's always good to refresh. So if you can define herd immunity for us, Dr. Chase.
Certainly. The thing about herd immunity then is it ends up being it's the ability to get immunity within the herd, where the idea is that you get it high enough so that even if there's an animal that's in the herd that's susceptible, they're going to be protected. And that's because whether it's the virus or bacteria, it has to typically multiply from one animal to move to the next animal. And so the whole key thing then is you've got to be able to achieve some level of immunity in the herd. And so typically, what we'd like to do is have a vaccine, because then we can control that in terms of what we're going to administer the animal and make sure that that animal actually develops an immune response. And so that, typically at some point, and I think of, the best case I think of sort of in recent history where we've done a good job with that is look at PCV2. So PCV2, and I can remember in the, I was on these calls forever that would be on, and this is the early 2000s. You hear about all this stuff going on in Canada. That's not happening in any of the flows that I'm dealing with, but it was still interesting to listen to. And then when you saw it, and then you realize all the kind of things. So we're back into things like feedback and all other kinds of things that are not, they're you can't control the dose. There's a lot of things you can't control about that. And then when the vaccine came along, it was like, it was like a winner that quick. It was like unbelievable. Yeah. You're looking at 25% mortality, and all of a sudden you're back down under 5 again. It was just like, it was awesome. It was like, to me, one of the again, where we went from start to finish, new emerging disease, made the diagnosis, came up with some stopgaps, that then moved on to get a quick vaccine. And the key there then is how many of those animals that you can get to develop immune response. Because the other thing about immunity is that immunity is still about biology. Okay, so it's still about that the animal still has to respond, and it's age dependent. It's certainly stress is a huge factor with that. And so when you look at developing herd immunity as a vaccination program, the first thing that you've got to realize right from the get-go is you're not going to get 100%. Okay, and then the other thing that comes into that then is how infectious is the agent. Okay, and so we know, so if you look at circovirus, for example, circovirus is probably, we use a term that we use, which you've certainly seen, is R naught, which basically is how many other animals or how many other people can be affected efficiently by that infected person, typically. Again, super shedders are they're the ones that kind of throw this off a little bit, but typically, so we talk about R naught, and so an R naught, like we know COVID-19, it's between 1 and 2. Which doesn't sound so bad on the surface, which it wouldn't be if you had herd immunity. Because the problem is when you don't have herd immunity and everybody is susceptible, that when that gets in, that you're infecting 2 people, okay? And then you're infecting 2 more people, and then it's geometric. And so the key then with herd immunity then, as we manage swine disease then, is to get, so one is that they develop that immune response, that we get it into them prior to the time of exposure, so that again, we know that again, it's not going to be 100% of the animals are going to respond, but in most cases, if we get 70 to 80% of them to respond, that's going to be, that's probably for most things going to be good enough. Now, as soon as you change the curve though, when you go into things that are even more infectious. So if you talk about foot and mouth disease, then basically, you got to be at the top of the curve, and that's why typically, and now they develop new strategies for foot and mouth disease. But it used to be like it was those high path avian influenza. I mean, you would go in, and then you would identify the area, you would quarantine it, and then you'd go in and you'd remove, those animals would all be euthanized, and you'd have a complete depopulation of that area. But they discovered the last time, and they were effective with this in the Netherlands, is they did this thing called ring vaccination. So you'd work your way around the edge of where the outbreak was in a certain buffer zone, and then they would work a ring around that. Right. Then you knew that at least the animals that were in the ring had been vaccinated. Okay, and then that kind of gave you a barrier around that. And so so we even in things that are highly, that you need 95, 100% with something as contagious as foot and mouth disease, but they were able to rather than the thing going rampant, that ring vaccination protocol worked very good. And we right now, the one that we're obviously the swine industry worried about is African swine fever. And again, the problem there again is effective vaccine. And certainly if you look so far, there hasn't really, that I've seen, really a good strategy, other than going in and identifying and removal in terms of being able to do that right now. So foot and mouth disease certainly gives us some promise, but until we get a vaccine for African swine fever, and of course, this obviously COVID-19 has taken all of our minds off that, but we can't forget about that because that's still lurking out there. And, and always, and certainly a big threat. And so, I think PEDV, we saw what that can do. The good news about that is that it's a disease that they did develop good immunity against, but then now subsequently, because I'm old enough that, TG was a big issue when I was in swine practice to begin with. I mean, that was a disease that was catastrophic as far as we were concerned, and the vaccines were so, and then the virus did an amazing U-turn on us, and that's the other thing. So usually we think about viruses when they make a turn, you'd say they make a turn to make things worse, and it turned out that's not what happened with TG.
Okay.
TG mutated and changed from being, so the thing about coronaviruses is that they can be, as we've seen with this one, with COVID-19, is they can be both respiratory or enteric, and obviously TG is very much more of an enteric disease, and then it mutated and it lost part of its spike protein, lost about 150 amino acids, and then it became respiratory, and then it became porcine respiratory coronavirus, which doesn't cause hardly any disease, but gives you tremendous immunity against TG. And I mean, we don't talk much more about vaccinating for TG, but this is a case where because for the virus, it actually made more sense, right? So I cause a mild disease, I can infect more animals, but I don't kill the host, and I can just kind of hang out. And because when they kill the host, that's the end of the virus. Okay, so
right,
yeah. So TGE was one of those where and you can make there's a few other examples of that where the virus actually made things, the mutations, because usually you think about mutations, it's going to be worse, it's going to escape the vaccine and all this, but that was a case where actually it made things much better. So that's why I always have a job, even when I'm retired. It's just like viruses and immunology there's never an end to it.
Job security, right?
Yeah. It's always it will be the final frontier, and we'll never get to the end of it. Okay, so anyway.
Wow.